Yeah, so I guess, a quick introduction. There's Archier's made up of the three of us. I'm based in Hobart. The two Chris's are based in Melbourne. Chris and I are actually originally from Hobart. That's hence the Hobart connection. And we've got a workshop in Preston where an old workshop we share with another company where we sort of prototype and make our furniture. And
do the lighting prototyping as well.
Yeah, furniture and lighting, sorry. And we're just about to set up a secondary
architecture office
space. A more formal. We've got, as part of our big workshop, we've got workspace, but it's not as conducive as we originally imagined. But we're about to set that up in Carlton North, or FitzGerald, yeah.
He's from Hobart, so he doesn't know his way around Melbourne.
Just I did it, yeah. So a bit about us. I guess today we're going to talk about architectural error. We're going to sort of flick through our furniture, lighting, and then also our architecture and sort of how they all sort of intertwine, and how they bounce off each other and things we learn.
About at the very start, we're going to go through how we've set up the company, the ideas that we had when we were setting up the company, what we wanted the company to be, but then what actually happened when we tried to do it, and the errors that occurred and how those errors actually led to better things, and hopefully lead to better things.
Yeah, so even in this first part we can demonstrate an error. But yeah, this is quite a simple diagram, but it's showing, I guess, how we're all sort of interconnected. The three of us studied originally down at UTAS in Launceston. As I said, Chris and I are from Hobart. We even went to school together. He was a few years above me, but we all started at UTAS, then when we finished our third year, we all took a year off to work, and we all ended up in Melbourne. The two Chris's went to RMIT. I came down here to Deakin, and I finished my final 2 years here. From there, we sort of migrated between these two companies. Chris went, during that year off, he worked at JCB, Jackson Clements Burrows in the CBD, and Chris Gilbert worked at Room 11 at the Hobart office, and I bounced between a few others down in Hobart and then over here. And so when we all finished, Chris Haddad went to JCB. He also got me a job there. Chris Gilbert went to Room 11, and then shortly after I jumped to Room 11 as well. So then the two of us were at Room 11, and then one by one we've sort of moved back to Archier. I think Chris Gilbert, it was about a year and a half ago, he sort of moved into it full time. Chris Haddad.
I went full time with the company about a year ago,
and I'm only about 2 months ago, sort of thing. So during that time, obviously working in the background a lot, and so it's quite a relief to be able to do it full time, I guess.
I'm just going to talk about when we first started the company. We wanted to have three sections to it. We wanted it to be obviously the architecture and client-based sort of traditional architecture model. We also wanted to have teaching as part of something that we do. So Chris Gilbert teaches at MIT, and I teach at University of Melbourne. And then one of the issues that we sort of had when we were working for architecture companies was that architecture projects can take, a year or two to go from design to the final outcome. And we were all working through the global financial crisis, and a lot of projects that we started on fell through, and it was a little bit disheartening when you put all this effort in and then it never becomes a real project. So we'd always spoken about product design and lighting design being part of the business, so that you could have this more immediate feedback loop. And we really loved the idea of having a workshop where if we had an idea, you could have an idea in the morning, prototype it in the afternoon, and then actually be holding a real thing at the end of the day. So that was the idea. The other idea behind the three categories was about income and sort of balancing income. So the theoretical income model that we were hoping was architecture would come in peaks and troughs. Teaching would sort of offer, just part-time teaching would offer a bit of base salary, so we could all eat if architecture projects fell through. And then the product design would, after a little bit of initial outlay, would make sales here and there, and hopefully
Fill the gap.
that would allow, you know, a steady income. What actually happened was we got architecture jobs, and, you know, we were just discussing before that mainly at the start they're through family and friends and, you know, just whoever is willing to take a chance with you. So we were lucky in getting opportunities at the start, but again, you never quite get enough work. And we weren't getting as much work as we had hoped, but we had the teaching, so that was great, that came through. But the product design, so we didn't really anticipate just how much capital was required. So a typical architecture model, starting a business, is low overheads. You know, you just need a computer, a roof over your head. Sometimes you can just work from home and have your meetings in the cafe. So your initial startup capital, you don't need very much. But the product side of it, and not having experience in the product side of it, because we came from architecture firms, was that, well, no, you need a warehouse space, you need to buy tools, you need machinery, you need to buy stock of materials. There's all these initial outlays that we
Really
hadn't anticipated, which we really should when you think about it. It's not rocket science, but
as you can see, it's gradually coming back up, and so
yeah,
not as much as a wave. We were expecting to go lows, and then, you know, it would peak, and then as it peaks, you jump in and start prototyping again, so you'll pull it back down. But overall, you know, we've sort of that's just dragged out a little longer than we expected.
and I guess if we had our time again, we would start with just more capital behind us. So,
What sort of time frames? This is probably, you know, maybe a year to a year and a half time frame.
yeah,
That's sort of what we're demonstrating there. Sorry. Yeah, but yes. Anyway.
and then, so another aspect of having architecture and then product design and lighting design was that we had our first architecture job, which was the Sawmill House, and we were lucky enough for this job to be picked up by Grand Designs Australia. So this was a house that, you know, family and friends. The example being that Chris Gilbert, the other director, it was for his brother Ben, who's a sculptor. So two brothers, the sculptor and the architect, they thought it would make great television. So it got picked up by Grand Designs and got filmed. But the one issue with Grand Designs is after the house finished, they had a media blackout until the episode aired, and we couldn't publish it. We couldn't even show finished pictures on our website. So even though in the lead up to it, we're thinking Grand Designs, great media, all these sort of things, it was almost a bit of an Achilles heel for 9 months it took for the episode to air. And it's hard to generate new jobs when, you know, you can't really have your work out there. So the Grand Designs episode aired, and then suddenly we've got the media coverage. So that's what happened with the architecture. But the thing that we found, having the furniture aspect and the lighting aspect, was that during that blackout period, we were able to prototype furniture. We were able to put things up on Instagram, social media. And through that generated brand awareness and managed to get on the design files and get interviews for furniture magazines and all these things that managed to get our name out there. And then when people came and they were like, oh, I'm interested in a table or a custom thing here, they're like, oh, you do architecture? Me and my husband, we're looking for some property, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it leads to architecture work. So
they're very similar. They're very similar markets as well. So sort of someone looking for high quality, handcrafted, locally designed and manufactured furniture is also going to appreciate good architecture. And so, yeah, there was sort of some peaks in here as well because, you know, as the product was completed, or we could make it look completed. We're going to talk through our products, I guess, as we go. But there was one product that had a few times we're like, great, ready to go, let's start selling this, and then we just went back into it. And so that's why we've got some good little peaks in there. So, yeah, I guess that's another benefit of moving through that.
So this is actually, I guess, where we ended up, or where we've ended up through going through that process and where we want to move to. So we want to keep the teaching side. Teaching is really good to keeps you in touch with new ideas and what's happening, and having that connection with the university is a really important thing to keep going.
The theoretical side of architecture as well. So part of it as well, Chris Gilbert, not this one, was at RMIT the other night. He had just a tutorial session. He got me to come along, and that's the first one I've done like that. And it was very informal, but he was asking me to explain how to use InDesign and do a few little tricks that I sort of know back to front. But it really makes you question how you work and why you work those ways. And that, to me, like a very minor little... I was trying to teach them how to make some cool maps. That actually impressed a lot upon me. And so these guys are actually taking whole classes. And so that I always saw the value, but now I can really appreciate it, the questioning of yourself.
And, you can have your ideas about architecture and your ideas about the work you're doing, but until you have to explain that to someone and you're putting your ideas out there for critique, it's only then that you start getting feedback, and it really makes you think more than just in your head. You've got to, how do I actually explain this?
You've got to articulate it.
Yeah.
Putting it on paper is a pretty big thing, or presenting it to someone. You've got to convince someone effectively.
So, and also, I'm working in the fabrication lab at the University of Melbourne, so even just having access to 3D printers and laser cutters and the CNC router and things that I just kind of take for granted, I took for granted when I was at uni and didn't use as much as I should, but as soon as you're out in the real world and you realise just how much those toys cost.
You've got to pay for someone to build.
Yeah, so it's a great thing to have as well, that we can be doing powder 3D prints of some lighting profiles, and just really using the facilities there to our own advantage while still giving back and being connected. So teaching is, and hopefully will be, a big part of what we keep doing. The architecture side of it, one of the big things is we want to move away from a client-based service industry of architecture and basically be doing our own architecture projects. So as architects, we tend to value add for other people, and make money for other people by obviously giving them good design, and it's there's no reason why we can't do that for ourselves. So one of the projects we'll talk about later is an apartment that Josh bought and then did up it himself and then sold, and that's allowed him to quit his job and come full time to us, and have a bit of financial security in that process. So that is something that we would like to do more of in the future.
But not necessarily everything has to be like that. There's
no.
This is, and that sort of breakdown is sort of 2/3, 1/3 at the moment, but it could flip. Again,
it's about, I guess it's about being financially secure, so you can be a little bit more selective about the jobs you take, and that you're not always just chasing the next job and the next job because you need to pay your bills. So
scarcity mindset where how am I going to pay the next bill? Where's money going to come from? And because with that, you can just pick up some rubbish work. To be honest, you do work that you really shouldn't be doing, and you sort of justify it in saying that I've got to pay the bills, and it's sort of so.
And everyone has to do it, but if we're trying to say, well, if we can do it, if we can not do it, or do it at just a little bit, and try and be more secure in our financial situation, then that's great. Then where we want to move to with our products is we were doing product design and lighting design, but we're also doing a lot of the manufacture. And it's just basically at the early stage, we needed to be producing our own work because it wasn't financially viable to be outsourcing all the aspects of it. And so it was part of the learning process of doing it all, so that's been fine. But at the end of the day, we're not craftsmen, we're not furniture makers. There's people that do it better, and that's not what we're trained to do. We're designers, so there's better things that we can be spending our time on. So ideally, but we still like that hands-on aspect because you learn so much. So we want to do the product design, and we want to have a workshop, but more of a prototyping workshop, and then as soon as it moves to manufacture, it's something that you outsource. Now we're just going to go through some of our furniture products, starting off with the smaller.
Yeah, we'll sort of scale up. So we started with some of the original products, which, funnily enough, are probably the finer grain ones, and we'll sort of work our way through those.
And sort of we'll explain what the issues were, what we learnt when things went wrong, and the advantage of error.
Yeah, so this is the Hex Light. This was just a pendant light which came in clusters of 3, a cluster of 3 or a single one. It was originally made from a brass, like a solid brass extrusion, hexagonal extrusion, hence hex bar. And so the one on the bottom left there you can see is the polished brass, but then we started moving into, obviously you can't have a singular product, you need the benefit of a range. So we moved to a stainless steel, a mild steel.
That was a mild steel hex bar that was then powder coated. But what we found from this, this was, we've never dealt with guys doing engineering milling and all these aspects. So we were learning all about that in the process, learning about what components, LED components you need, what drivers you need. So this was just our first foray into dabbling in the lighting and finding out what are the processes involved.
Just like very simple things where, like working with metal, if you can't do it, how do you do it? And
how do you source? Where do you find people that can? Where are the industrial areas in Melbourne that you can go out and there's people out there that can do amazing things. And it's also knowing what can be done. So it's like if you have an idea, that there's a tool that can do it, or a machine, or a technique that can be used. So, and the thing with this one is that we found we were also entering a very saturated market with pendants. That, although we really liked it, it didn't really get much of a response. So we just decided to can it.
Yeah, we no longer make. We obviously have all the techniques in process, and it might be revived at one point in time. But this is, I guess, our first example of where we just sort of decided to cut it off, and rather than we had a lot of sunk cost and time, and the amount of time and effort that went into that. There's a lot of it, but it was better for us to move on.
It wasn't wasted at all because it was that learning process that we'd gone through.
And so that sort of moves on to the second product, which I guess you can...
So, yeah, we'd obviously had all this hex bar lying around, and it was my sister's birthday. I didn't have anything to give her. So I decided this idea of doing these hex concrete and brass candle holders, tea light candle holders. And there was sort of another aspect to this was that what we'd been learning from this brand awareness of having stuff on Instagram, and getting our name out there. It was, can we use smaller products, smaller homeware products, things that are cheaper, more accessible, just to get the company's name out there, and with the hope that people pick up a candle set and then we slip in a card with some of our lighting
they might come to have they come to have a look at our architecture, and they might go, I might buy that. It looks like a good, again, I haven't got something for my sister. I can get that. And surprisingly enough, this is probably one of the most successful things that we've done, and the orders are constantly coming in. And so
we're constantly slipping the cards in there, so it's sort of like sending out these packages that, hopefully might return some architectural work. But as a young firm, you're not really paying for advertising before you've got any projects that have been on the television. So this was obviously in this period during the blackout for the media blackout for the Sawmill House, that we're just trying other ways of getting our name out there.
And I guess as well, so part of that as well, this wasn't a primary focus, it was an undercurrent, as Chris said. He did this all in his own time when we were dealing with other stuff. He needed to make it, and it was just sort of an experimentation. And sort of, again, I think we touched on it before, and we will again, the life cycle of architecture, you need something to fill those gaps, and this was just one of those. And again, as we said, this was I guess if I had to relate it back, it was an error of judgment where I personally was like, they're cool. Like when you have that many of them, it's amazing. But it is super successful. And so this is a good error.
And the other thing about this was we were pouring the concrete. So concrete was something we were interested in. We were interested in doing our own concrete bench tops. Chris, I'll get to it. Chris was doing a renovation of his apartment in Melbourne. It's imaginary Chris that I was just motioning to. And so we were interested in learning to pour concrete and using the concrete in our furniture. So this was a sort of nice start to test out a few of the techniques. And then this led to our coffer bedside table. So this came about instead of saying, oh, we want to design a bedside table, so how do we do this? What actually happened was we wanted to test pouring concrete, and also we wanted to test methods of quickly making moulds to pour concrete into. So
just quickly, when you say concrete, it's not your typical one. It's a
glass fibre reinforced concrete. So
rather than your Rio or steel in it, it's glass fibres, just like strands
that form a matrix within inside the concrete, and that's your reinforcement.
So that's what's allowing, you can get the concrete down to stupidly thin. Like people make tiles out of them, like 600, 300 tiles, and you can bang them, they won't break. If anything, they tear, which is pretty amazing. And so, yeah, so part of that was one of the concrete parts. We weren't just trying to pour concrete, we were experimenting how to actually make that mix as well, like the different ingredients and the balances and how to get the colours. Like you can see there's the two different colours there.
We've got at our workshop, we've got a wasteland of concrete pours gone wrong.
There's a few images of other products that you'll see coming through, and you can see things leaning up against the wall where we've started to, there are a few favourites, I guess, where, again, a lot of them might be sort of products. But so I guess where you're coming at was that image on the bottom right, that was a sample just to test. We were not only the concrete, but then also the formwork. It sounds very easily to make a form, but you need something that you can reuse so it's cost effective and then also quick. So you need something quick.
And there's your typical things, you can do fiberglass or you can do rubber molds and these sort of things, but they're not cheap to do. And we were starting out, we didn't have money, and the guys we were sharing our studio space with, another furniture company, they do a lot of their furniture out of plywood, so they had a CNC router. So we were lucky enough to be in the same space as them and able to use that. So we're like, well, how do we make molds quickly without having to go get them fiberglass or whatever? So we came up with the idea of using MDF and with the CNC router and making the formworks. But obviously the issue with MDF is it's not waterproof. So we came up with the idea of getting a special film that is used in the aviation industry, and you can use a vacuum pump and actually vacuum bag over the MDF and then waterproof it. So
it's a bit like cloud wrap, but super stretchy. So you sit it over, it's a thin plastic, and then as you suck the air out, it stretches into almost any form you want. Like it's got a certain radius and so forth, and it might tear if you have to pull one bit to air it far. But that's where you can see as well underneath that table is the sort of curves.
So it just gave us a tool. All of a sudden, we could make molds quickly, mold them up the computer. Bang, you can do any sort of pattern. So it provided that opportunity. So if you look at the bottom right, we just poured a test plate that had the corrugations, and that was literally pour the concrete in, and that's what we had. And then from that, we had the idea of maybe this could be a bedside table if we had timber legs that sort of locked into the corrugations. And
that's actually come up very well. Like we had people coming into the workshop at that point in time and going, wow, what's this? And like, oh, yeah, that was a test. And going back a step before we put it on legs, I think it was stacked up on something. And yeah, and again, this was, this is about 10 steps deep, is how we got there, and it just sort of, again, just evolved as that object. And the one above it, the circular one, that was when we were like, okay, well, let's actually now explore this as an avenue.
Yeah, it was just a sort of nice process. Instead of saying, okay, this is what I want to design, how do I do it? It was, let's experiment with materials, and then you almost get given something, and you're like, well, what can that be? And opportunities arise from that. And from that process of doing all the vat bagging and the concreting, That led to the Piccolo coffee table, which was a product that was somewhat commercially viable. So we decided to put these for sale, put these up on our website, set up a web store that Josh set up. And yeah, so that was from all that mucking around with candles and the bedside tables, we suddenly had the skills.
This is when we realised, okay, now let's actually design something. So yeah, and this again, as Chris was saying, we've actually been quite successful. This is again, it's a bit more an accessible product. It's well priced for what it is, being solid concrete. This one here is the marble white, which is just the concrete has an amazing texture. It's awesome.
Just a tip with if you're ever doing furniture and you're putting things on Instagram, always put a cute dog in your photos, and you're guaranteed to get more likes.
And so then this is another example where just very recently we've decided we're not going to sell this anymore. I guess this is another example, as Josh is saying, that you do something, you reflect on it, and you go, okay, did that work? Did that fail? What did I learn? So basically, this has been a successful product. We've sold a lot of them, but it's very labour intensive, especially with the concrete. And because of our techniques of doing the back bagging, it's not something easily outsourced. We did look at a guy that was just pouring bird baths and garden gnomes, and just to see if he could do our concreting for us. But as soon as I started talking about glass fibre and polymers and all these things to add in the concrete, his eyes glazed over, and we're like, all right, this is not going to work. Nah.
So this is, again, we go, okay, this is a successful product, but we're not manufacturers. I would rather, as much fun as it is to get off the computer and mix up some concrete, it's not what we want to be doing full time as designers.
But again, it's going back to the Hex Lights. It's something we can pick back up again.
Yeah, well, there's obviously countless opportunities, and we're looking at doing a collaboration with a friend who does lighting design, and he's got this fantastic light it's like an array in these hexagon patterns, and we were just like, that would make a great frame for a table if you brought that off the ceiling, put it on the ground, and then we pour a concrete top for it. So there's things develop
sort of
from it. As soon as you start learning skills, you see opportunities in other things.
This one's the Otway table as well. This was designed for a friend of ours. It's the top left one is the original one we made for her, which is out of brazed brass.
Yeah,
brass
and a
blackwood top with feet, and that in itself is pretty amazing. Like it's a really nice table. And so we originally designed that for a client in mind, and then we decided to keep developing it after that as a full-time product, because again,
it was a good outcome, and there was also lessons learned from that process. So
one thing we learned, brass is quite a soft material, and the leg walls weren't quite thick enough, and so as you can see in the further iterations moving along, we've actually got a bit more bracing. We moved to stainless steel. So one thing we learned as well is moving to stainless steel, whilst being a little more expensive, it allows you to have it as an outdoor table as well. You cover more markets. And so that's a very little minor detail, but that in itself, you don't really think of at the start. And it's that sort of, we're starting now to get into that product mindset, and it allows the flexibility, I guess, and we're trying to ingrain that into our products.
And I guess the interesting thing with this one was the brass one was all fabricated by hand. So we had a really great fabricator in Brunswick that we were using, and he has a background in jewellery making, so he's really good with fine detail. And so we had the brass bar, and we got that bent, and then he was actually hand filing all the cross members so they would fit together, and hand brazing and drilling all the holes manually. And it was a great process and great to see, but it was an expensive process. So we just went, well, this is great, and this for a custom piece of furniture, people can pay that. But if we're going to turn this into a product that we can sell, we need to bring costs down. So how do we do that? So in the process of doing that, we shifted to the stainless steel for the reasons that Josh said, but we also went sort of tried to automate a lot of the processes. So we get the legs bent on a CNC bent, and then all the scalloping and the holes are done on a rotary 3D laser. And
the tabletop as well is now, it's laminated by hand, but then the guys in the workshop we share with, they now cut it out on the router, so we've got all the tool bits and everything, so that profile is, while it could be handmade, it's now just sort of, again, another step of automation to sort of lessen our workload.
well, yeah, and I guess it is lessening our workload, but it's also it's also that we can't do it. So it's saying that you're a designer, you're an architect, so you understand design. You also get, it's been a jack of all trades, and understanding that there's automated ways of doing things. So cutting things out on CNC, using industry to your advantage. So one of the things that has made this possible is that software in the last few years has changed that industry is using. So SolidWorks is a program that you guys can, I won't say legally download, but get your hands on probably through the university, and you can learn. It's like connected through with Revit and everything like that. So that is some software that you can learn, and that was never.
There's quite a big disconnect between that and the final manufacturer. A lot of them being made by hand, but nowadays that gap's just closed. So you can almost model this up, and it's a lot easier to get it built and actually manufactured. Here at uni, that's again going back to, you have that connection and it's right there, but to go out into the marketplace, it's just few and far between, and they'll probably charge you an arm and a leg. But yeah, even over the last year or so, we've seen that again getting easier to achieve.
Yeah, and industry is now using software that we can access as opposed to whatever they were sort of using beforehand. So that means that the distance between you as a designer and industry is closing. So you can model things up, send them off to like the guys that do our 3D laser cutting make parts for Ford. So they're doing like big things, amazing things. They're doing lots of them, and then we just send them something for 10 tables, and they're more than happy to do it. So it's recent technology and software changes have made that link a lot easier.
I need to speed up these products and get into the architecture.
Yeah, so this was an iteration of the Otway table, which we're just talking about living in apartments and having a smaller option for people in the apartment market. So that was just sort of learning from feedback that we'd got from people that had been.
A lot of our friends as well, who were our immediate contacts. So while this is all being built, before we had that finished product to be able to sort of launch it publicly, which did take a while because we were still learning, especially with the Otway was one of our first products. In the background, we had a lot of friends that we were sort of showing it to, but a lot of them lived in smaller footprint dwellings, like apartments and so forth. And this was quite often asked for. And so we then realised that as well, that there's another market for it. And so we adapted what we'd learned with that, and then this just sort of came together. And so it's
using the same legs as the other one. It's just reconfigured, so we can get all the legs bent up, and then depending if people order a round one or a big one, it's just about being adaptive with your process.
So this is the Highline brass pendant. This is a product I'm hoping this is the final iteration, because part of what we love about this product is it's been about an 18-month process. This began back in the days at the beginning of the Sawmill House. Also, for my apartment, we needed just a minimal light and something that had a bit of quality and weight to it, not an aluminium extrusion that was either stupidly cheap or really expensive.
So yeah, we saw a bit of a hole in the market for linear pendants, because obviously there's a lot of individual pendants on the market, and that's where our Hex Light was trying to sit, and that was saturated. But as far as really minimal linear lights, there was a gap there, and because we were looking for it in our architecture projects and we couldn't find it, and then we just like
we had two projects that we could put it in, so it sort of made it feasible to test. And we'll show you some images. We're getting into the architecture,
and the beauty with this one is it's reached a stage where we've picked up a lighting manufacturer in Melbourne that now makes these for us. So this is now a product that we get an order, we send the email to our manufacturer, they make it and send it out, and everyone gets paid, and we've just sent a few emails. So it's
Makes it sound really easy, but
Well, I mean, it makes it sound easy now, but yeah, like Josh said, this has been an investment of time and money, and so much money and time in the last year and a half, 2 years. So it's
this as well. So just with the wires, this image, interestingly enough, I was saying to Chris before, is over a year old and about 3 iterations old as well. Like the light is fundamentally, it looks exactly the same, but it's become a lot more refined. We've completely redesigned how it works internally. It's only 19 millimeters tall, and that in itself to me actually was amazing when I saw this photo again. And so something as small as this and the amount of time you can put into it, I guess what I learned from this was, as an architect, you sit there and go, why has no one done this? And it's because it takes 18 months of 3 people doing it.
Yeah.
Not full time, but putting a lot of time, a lot of money and a lot of effort into it. That's why you don't see things like this as easy as you do, as often as you do, sorry. Another version of this was also a timber one. Again, you'll see this in the sawmill. We wanted to make something out of timber, and another sort of variation of it. This one's still in development.
Yeah, so I guess going through the process with the brass one, we learnt about all the lighting components and all the stuff to make it work, and you know what happens inside the light. So from learning all that, we're like, well, now we can start cladding that technology and that knowledge in different things. So we looked at doing it in timber, but timber's just been really difficult to work with because it moves around a lot and it's really hard to keep these things straight. So it's something that we're working with another furniture designer who he specialises in timber. He's helping us, and we're prototyping new ideas together on that. But yeah, it's just showing that once you sort of do the background in one section, you know, it sort of leads to multiple new ideas and new products.
And then one interesting thing so a few of these products, I've been in Hobart, I have had a bit of distance. There's a few that I've been fundamentally involved in. But this was one where I can remember the Chris's did an iteration of it, and they were just at one point just pumping out a whole, like, okay, here's 3 options that may work, let's see which one works the best, and we grab that and then we move on. And there was a design they had, and I think they did a complete loop where this is how we can make it, but it's just too labour intensive. And then through the other iterations, they worked out, okay, now that we know this, we can go back to this one, and we can get that original design aesthetic we're looking for, but more efficiently. And so there was literally a complete circle, but the amount of work and time and effort and thought that went into that, that's still not complete. There are still issues, and so that's still going. But it's just this willing to accept, okay, because they actually did move on quite far, and each one of those lights could have been a successful product because they all looked amazing. But we're willing to go, no, we can't do that, and so forth. And then that's where this one is.
I think we're going to be moving on to architecture after this. No?
This is...
So this is Sideboard, yeah, we'll just go... So this is Sideboard, another custom one that we did for our friend that had the Otway table, and she wanted one for her records, and this has been, especially with the dog, it's been really good on Instagram, and it's got us, you know, a lot of web traffic. So that's the other thing. You can read how many hits you're getting on your website as soon as you post something on Instagram. So yeah,
this was a combination. Like, we had a few other iterations and so forth, but actually there we go. Just quickly, you can see the concrete in the background. That top left one was a very early design, like really trying to test and push that concrete to the limit.
And the capabilities of CNC milling on formwork as well.
And the moulding, and so, that's a really cool piece.
So moving on to our architecture.
So this is the 5 Yards house down in Hobart, on the eastern shore. This was designed and built for an older couple that have just retired, one being a landscape architect and one, Carmel's a teacher. They've both got an absolute love for the garden, and it's 5 Yards house because there are 5 yards scattered in. I can't show you the gardens at this point because they're not complete, so we've only got photos internally at the moment. But the design revolved around that. They wanted not just a pavilion where you lived, like the garden was around you. They wanted to live with the garden. And so, as you can see with these snapshots, you won't again see a complete shot, but you can see how every room has its own relation to a different courtyard. So as you enter, You know, obviously there's the shared yard, but then as you enter, there's an entry yard, which is the communal one. You move through, there's one for the bathroom, there's one for the master, and then one for the library.
Yeah, I guess one of the interesting things about this project was the innovation side of it. We built this project out of SIPS panels, which are structurally insulated panels. So these are the structurally insulated panel system. Yeah, let's learn something. And so this is a single skin built-in solution where you've got a foam core and then you've got the OSB board on either side.
Oriented strand board. So,
and these are actually cut out on a CNC router, and
in Canada,
and then shipped. They were shipped all the way to Australia. So.
You can just make out on the left of the image there, down the bottom, that's all timber. And so what the builder does is he literally crams them full, and it's actually a really efficient way. So this is, whilst it's newish, I'm actually starting to see a lot of people get up to this, and we're not the first. Whilst it's newish to Australia, it's pretty well established in Europe and North America. And so this was more efficient and cost effective, therefore, to have it shipped from Canada and bought in here. They produce stupid amounts of this because over there they've already recognised the value of it. And so in doing so, he also brings over as much timber, as you can see down the bottom, some spare polystyrene, because materials over there, I believe, are quite cheap. So he really does maximise it. But yeah, the panels literally turn up on the container like so. Unloaded, there's just, I think, how many people are on site? Maybe, I'm going to say 4 or 5.
I think it was 3 or 4. So I guess one of the things, why were we doing this to start with? We just saw huge advantages with SIPs in the final outcome compared to a normal stud frame build. You know, I think I heard somewhere that a typical Australian home has the equivalent of like a 1 metre by 1 metre open window of air leakage throughout it, and just through how it's built and building it by hand, and using something that's cut out with a computer. These are just the most airtight and thermally
simple solutions. I think it's a simple way to achieve that. And yeah, and so part of it is that it's the supplier, who's Melbourne based, he came down to Hobart, and our builder, who's the one on the far left there, I think, he'd never dealt with it before. So in the design process, that was quite interesting in itself. Because no one's dealt with it, you have to go and convince your building surveyor, you have to convince the energy consultant, and then council, and the engineer actually. The engineer was difficult, but engineering, sorry, is difficult because it itself is structural and insulative. So there's a lot of parties involved, but then at this point, you're now trying to deal with a builder who's never dealt with it before. So he took as big a leap of faith as we did, I guess. And he worked with the supplier. He brought a few of his men down. So there was, I'm guessing, 2 or 3 of his men. There was our builder, and then there was also Chris Gilbert. So he...
So about one of the things about us as a practice trying to be involved in all aspects of the architecture build, just to get that hands-on knowledge and that experience. So Chris went down to Tassie and he helped install this house with the SIPS subcontractor, and basically 3-4 guys put up all the walls of the house in 3 days.
And the roof.
And then the roof went on to, it was 2 more days to put the roof on after that. So that was one of the other things, is as far as costs, is it costs a little bit more than a traditional build, but the time that you save in construction makes up for it. And the end product, in our opinion, from what we found, is thermally a lot better.
Well, this actually, sorry, a little caveat there is that this is probably right on the threshold of where this is cost effective. It was I'm going to say 120 square metre, 2-bedroom house, and at that point there was enough in it to make it cost effective, because, you know, builders, it's their trade to put up stud insulation. That's what they do. They can actually do that quite quickly, quite cost effectively. So I would say that actually anything smaller than this, we did actually try one at 110, and it was I'm in an RN, and So I think 120 is probably where you need to start at that threshold. Obviously, you can see, we looked at this a fair bit, especially over here in Melbourne when I was at the Room 11 office over here. In tight urban spaces, that just saves you so much time and money because you can turn up, unload it, and you're good to go. Like, you don't need to take it up site. So,
because all the complexity of the building as well has been done in a factory.
yeah. So, and it's, there was,
and
which again makes sense.
The labour doesn't have to be anywhere near as skilled. So, Chris went down there and helped him. He's not a builder, so.
No, it's like he had to induct them for a bit, but once you can, you learn the process. And interestingly, sorry, it's clear, the builder down there, he's now the builder for Hobart. So whenever there's going to be SIPs, he'll be the guy that goes there, and so that they don't have to keep retraining people.
Well, and basically the builder's just said, this is amazing, I want to use it again. So he's seen the light. He's
a dude. He was not resistive, but he was really struggling because that, again, is his core part of his job, is the carpentry, is to put the walls up, and then he just manages people. And so he was struggling. And then the fact as well that was the finished surface. Like, that as well for us, it's not as, it sounds very straightforward. Okay, look, that panel is going to be the finished surface, but as you can see, people are just stomping about. At this point in time, they do not care about the building. And so to keep it in that state is, that in itself was a big learning curve. And so
I guess, one of the advantages was that the budget for this house wasn't much. And so it was about how do we build it quickly and easily, and also how do we finish it nicely with minimal labour. And so what we've decided to do is just with the ceiling, for example, instead of having plasterboard, we literally just painted that raw panel and painted it black. And then with the walls, we just put,
interestingly enough, the vast majority of the walls, we just literally, it was kind of funny because the builder just couldn't get his head around it for a while. We said just literally delete the plaster throughout because we'd moved from timber lining a lot of the spaces, but then the project enlarged considerably when they added a few things to the program. And so when that happened, we needed to cut things out. So we moved to plasterboard, but then again, things got bigger. And so so part of it was they decided to retire. So the budget was a definitive, no, we can't work. We're not going to be working, so it can't expand. And because we're retiring, we want this to be a bit bigger. It needs to be comfortable.
But I think SIPS as a product, because of its robustness and just, it's not plasterboard that can get damaged easily, it can be painted. It really created a nice aesthetic and a nice building, and the money that was saved in that process, we could use in other aspects. So in the glazing, so we could have extensive glazing throughout the whole house. So it was about leveraging the advantages of SIPs and just seeing what aspects of it work really well and trying to really push that.
So this is a really, again, this is actually a really nice photo. They've got this amazing painting there, and the character that the clients added to this just has really built upon the project. That Chase lounge, the chair is. We saw it originally. We said, no, you've got to get rid of that. That's not going in our project. And half joking because it's not our place to say that. But we were like, come on, what are you doing? But it fits amazingly. The character of that fits with the character of the building, I guess. That wall again was I don't think the builder still likes it.
But that was a cost-saving measure, which actually for us turned into one of the best features of the house.
And again, the client, and this was where when Chris was trying to say about how it's the raw SIPs, there's a lot of timber there, and that's because at this point in time, that wall was always going to remain as timber lined. When they saw that, they were like, she's actually now back at work to pay to line a lot of the other rooms.
But the advantage of this timber, though, is it's a shoulder pack timber, so it's short lengths, so it was super cheap.
It was a waste sort of product.
It was a waste product
for this.
So we were like, well, instead of using full lengths of timber that run floor to ceiling, which is what I've done previously at my practice and the other guys, and that's the typical look, we're like, let's sort of patchwork this together and use a sort of, not sanded or black, have it as a bit rougher texture.
So the at night as well, like the shadows, you get this extra depth. You run your hand down it don't think you get splinters, but it's almost at that point. But
it was something that we learned through the cost saving process, and then suddenly you've got this richer detail throughout the whole project, and it just wouldn't have been the same project had it been the floor to ceiling timber.
And we part of it as well, I was, to be honest, a little apprehensive at the start. How's this going to work? But we were actually really lucky. The builder had an apprentice on who used to be a painter, so an interior decorator. So he had this eye for detail. And I would come by on site every other day and he'd just be there matching it up to the millimetre. And so we were, again, quite lucky. We could trust them and just say, hey, look, just put it on these walls, and we'd walk away. Previously, I'm pretty sure at JCB you wouldn't do that. You would show them a drawing, you do an elevation, like this is where it's going. But we had this relationship, and the project wasn't about those finer details, it was about the overall space. And so you gave them a flexibility and a freedom. So these guys, we said these photos are just, the courtyards aren't finished, so this was only about a week ago we took these. The builder was actually the one that pushed for the photos because we were happy to wait till September just because the gardens are going to be amazing. But the builder's like, no, I need this photographed. I want to start showing people. And like, he's unbelievably proud. And so are all the other guys that work on it, which is, I think that actually speaks of how we've let them get involved. And it's not about us. It's not about our ego. It's ultimately about the client.
And it's about the team. So it's about working with. It's about coming to the final design through using all the people you have at your disposal and getting them excited about the project. And as soon as builders can complain about architects and the importance that we put on design and the issues that causes with them, but as soon as you get them excited about the project, you guys become a team and everyone starts working together and things happen that just wouldn't have happened otherwise.
Sorry, I was just seeing if the text changed. I think, there's some amazing photos. There's the sibs. That's what the ceiling looks like. It's a matte black. That's actually oiled there, but on the ceiling it's just a matte black.
So you see the texture of the
so just quickly, there it looks all plain, but then when you stop and you look up, it's just got this extra layer. And, we were a little worried about that. It might be a bit raw, but it's not. It's perfect. Like, it's exactly what you want. This is our project. Yeah, just quickly. This was the one that Chris mentioned. I bought this as I moved back to Hobart, and it's an apartment in Sandy Bay. That's the mountain up in the background there. Amazing views, and I renovated it over a 2-year period. It only settled about a month ago, and as you mentioned, this was our first sort of internal investigation
of the investor model and
investment,
moving away from a client-based architecture,
and just sort of baby steps, I guess you'd say. But in this, there was a lot that it took 2 years, and it has since then allowed us, like the return on that has not only really learned, but it's allowed me to step full time into Archier. As I mentioned, for the last however long, I've been working in the background in my spare time. But this was, as you can see, it's quite a change from what we just showed you. And part of that is because we weren't designing for ourselves or a known client. I hate to say it, we were designing for the market. There were a lot of things, that floor, for example, I'd been wanting to put a herringbone floor in forever. No one ever trusted me. And since then, now everyone says, yeah, I want that. And it just, I needed to show it myself. So that for me was enough for this project.
And we also these architecture projects allow us to prototype products. And so an example of this for Josh's project was that he made a custom brass towel rail.
Which isn't photographed in
which
there.
Isn't in there, but
opposite is the vanity. That was actually, that in itself as well was another item that it's a mild steel vanity, 3mm mild steel. I'd had a few people, I'd tried to, like, some projects put it into, but it was a bit resistant because it's mild steel, it's going to rust. It was going to be powder coated, but I've waxed it up and it's perfect. But that in itself was an exploration of trying to just, how do you make that one, cost effective, design and functional, like design properly and so forth. So,
and how do you do projects that then provide you the opportunity to test out other ideas. So, you know, it's about leveraging both products and the architecture to help each other. You know, you do the architecture, you put the products in it, you do your products, and that promotes brand awareness, as mentioned before. So they all feed off each other and help promote each other.
Yeah. Well, just a very quick one. You can see the highline there. One of the reasons I wanted the highline to be as minimal as possible is as you walk in the front door, which is next to the kitchen, I wanted that to disappear because that view of the mountain is just unbelievable. I knocked out a few walls in there, and so that you get that panorama. And so I didn't want a big clunky object in such a small space.
And then finally, we're going to talk probably quickly.
Yeah,
we're talking for a while.
Yeah, so
about the Sawmill House in Yakandanda. So this was the first residential project that we finished. This was the Grand Designs one. So this was for Chris Gilbert's brother, Ben Gilbert, who's a sculptor in Yakandanda, which is in 4 hours out of Melbourne.
Near the border, or
near Beechworth and Albury-Wodonga.
Yeah.
And that's Chris's hometown. And so Ben had bought the local sawmill about 8 years ago and turned that into his sculpture studio. And he had actually been living in the sawmill, so in the old tool sharpening shed. He'd made into a makeshift bedroom, and he'd been living there for 8 years. And it was time that he was ready to actually have a house to live in. So he was a very amazing client in the sense that he's excited. He's a maker himself. He's the type of guy that can build anything. So, and he was willing. He said, "I want this house to be a prototype house. Let's test some ideas. Let's see what we can do." So it was an opportunity that, you know, probably won't ever come again. But we will just, you know.
Well, yeah, yes and no. This is where if we can build our own projects, we can do this again. So that's where we're moving. So Jess had asked us the question: is, you know, you were very lucky with the sawmill. It seems like a one-off. How are you going to cope in the real world? And I guess that's what that last project we just quickly touched on was. We're trying to move towards that, so it is the real world. The one thing we just want to do is just question it. We might get a few years down the track and we might be back dealing with clients in the typical way because it just doesn't work. But at the moment, we're hoping it does.
So Ben, Ben's a sculptor. He does large-scale sculptures. He can build anything with his hands. So the plan was that he was going to build the majority of the house, and Chris.
The other Chris.
Chris was going to quit his job and join Ben, and they were going to build it together. So this happened over about a 15-month period, and this was done on very minimal documentation. So we wanted the process to be something where there's a flexibility and there's this aspect of learning by making, and it's something that this was coming from Ben, because Ben has always pushed us when we were at university. He used to come visit. He used to say, let's come out to Yakandanda, come to Sawmill, let's make some things, use your hands. There's so much value in using your hands and learning how to do things off the computer as an architect. Because he's just uses his hands, you know, and he's just like, that's where you really learn to design.
We made a table together once, and I was like, okay, cool, let's sit down. No. He went in there and just started cutting tube. And I'm like, okay, it's going to be out of tube. And then it literally was designed as it went. And I've still got it. It's awesome. It wouldn't have been any of those photos, but he's very proactive, and he's a lot like Chris. They just don't sit still. They don't stop thinking, which is a problem for us. We've got to try to keep up sometimes. But as you were saying, the minimal documentation. Part of that was as well. One thing that we recognise, you know, coming from other companies as well, where I'd spent a lot of time detailing like pages and pages of details. And something that I guess we realised just earlier was part of it is that once you've detailed that, there's a whole process to get to that point. So you need to start that process all the way back here. And so if you've already on the journey and something wants to change, it can't. Like you've got to keep moving. Sometimes it could, but by freeing that up at the beginning, you have a rough framework. This is what we're trying to achieve. You're not locked in, and like yes, you're still going to have to think ahead for a few things. And once you do, you're sort of locked in. But we didn't want that from the very outset. It wasn't as if, okay, it's designed, I've seen it on my computer, it's all modelled, job done. This looks nothing like what it was originally in the plans or model.
So one of the things was we wanted all the timbers and the materiality had to reflect Ben, being a sculptor. So there's metal from his previous projects that was left over that we use. He works with steel, he works with metals, so we wanted to incorporate that in the design. But also just in the region, all the timbers were sourced locally, and they were milled locally as well, just up the street. So
that in itself, it's touched on in grand designs, but there was a guy, Dennis, and he's awesome again. And there was a big storm, some trees fell over.
So he's the guy that owns the timber mill.
The timber mill, sorry. And so that was where the timbers come from. There's a moment on grand designs where Ben feels sorry about the trees he's cutting down. Like, that's the type of person he is. But there were a few trees like that.
The thing was, they actually fell down in the storm. So,
yeah, exactly. But he still gets upset.
He was still questioning whether he should take it. But we convinced him it was a good idea. So yeah, so
that's where the timber. I think I touched on it before, and it was only a small part of the process. But this was again, these three. Chris also jumped into it, and in the meantime, I was down doing my apartment by myself. But this was all going to be
going through this process of getting hands-on with the building process. Josh in his apartment, and Chris and myself on this, and we just found it so valuable as designers to do it. There was like a situation where we were making these timber screens, and I sort of had an idea in my head, and I sort of had of how I wanted to detail these, and I drew them up, just really roughly, and I looked at it and I realised that how do you actually make these? The way I've drawn them, and on the computer obviously you can zoom in, and everything seems to work. I realised you couldn't get a drill in there to screw up the screws. So it's like if you're one step removed away from the making process, you don't actually think about how it's put together. But as soon as you're put in a situation where you need to make it, all these really obvious things that
just fall into place. And again, that's where I just want to kind of justify that first part on the furniture, is that small grain, understanding the process of actually making something, and feasibly, like it has to be able to sell it. That's another level of detail you've got to go to, and then that's in the meantime all that's going on while they're building this. So Chris has obviously had this realization, which is pretty big in itself. That's probably why we annoy a lot of builders, and so because we don't recognise that, we as architects sometimes, and you can go there, and again, as we've seen with the Tranmere job, we're not there to sort of preach to them this is how it's going to be built. We want to use their knowledge. We don't pretend to know absolutely everything, and even down to what's the best way to screw something in. We don't want to leave that up to them and give them some
learn from each other.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So I guess some aspects of this house that this was Ben saying let's do something crazy. We've got 9 metres of glass that's been turned into one giant sliding door that slides out of the way.
We got a video later on. I can show that. But that was actually probably as Chris said, that was some commercial detailing. The other Chris, sorry, with the window frame. So we played with some angles and everything and other projects. We brought that into here, and that was just to really contrast. The glass was one of the real objects that we just did not want to touch or could not touch. And so that's where we actually had a bit of fun. So when that door is closed and you're looking down there, it's almost like a mirror reflecting the other side.
So to talk about how just bespoke and custom this house is, the guys built all the window frames themselves, and they even turned their own brass rollers that the doors are sliding on. So it was literally...
The mechanism, like the track and the mechanism that it sits on, and how it's all open and closes, and that's just how Ben and Chris, having grown up in this situation, that's how their brains tick.
It's just like if
next
if
level.
you've got an idea, then you make it.
Yeah.
More levels. And there's also the eave over the deck. There's 14 metres of roof that also slides out of the way. So that was the idea, that in winter you can have the house all closed with the glazing, but then you can open up that outside eave and then get deep sun penetration. And
that was the energy efficiency guy. I forget what he's called over here. I know Hobart guy, but we needed to have something that was operable. So the typical solution of I can't even think of a typical solution now because that just makes sense. The solution was, okay, we want this roof here.
It's passively, heating and cooling the house.
But how would you normally do that, I guess? Well, fundamentally the problem was we need to be able to open it up in winter to get the heat in, close it up in summer because it's baking hot. And that again is reflected here. Like the entire place opens up. It's touched on the original. The plans come from a civic origin where this is still a industrial site, and this is the caretaker's house. So Ben's got an alternative function as a function space, effectively. So he can.
He's a very social guy, and there's always been the local sculptor in town. People dropping in, and he's got his coffee machine and always having a chat with people. So the design of the house was going to have the kitchen as a central element in the living space, and we wanted the glazing to open up for it to become like a public
exhibition space,
civic space.
Yeah.
Because there was always someone dropping in and saying hello, and also having little nooks where Ben could have a study, have his desk, and looking out to the view. So these are the timber screens that talked about that we made. So these are made from macrocarpa, which is a type of tree that was planted as windbreaks on farms. So I think it was planted in the 40s or a while ago, and now they're reaching the end of their lifespan and they're falling down. So again, this was trees that had fallen, and it was because it's this almost like a waste timber. It's not a harvested timber.
What's it normally used for? It's more of a landscape product than a finished product, I think.
It's not used at all. It's like, well, the trees were used for windbreak, so that was typically what they were used on farms. And because of that, we got it in boards, and then we cut the boards in half on the bandsaw, and then once that was done, the timber cost about $1.20 a linear metre. So each one of those battens was like $2-3. So suddenly you've got something sourced locally. It's very waste product, and it's cost effective. So there's really nice aspect of it. And the thing about this is we actually screwed them all on while the timber was still green, and we just pinned it at 2 points so the timber can have a little bit of space to shift and move as it dries. So that provides a next level of texture and almost theatre to the facade as the building ages.
It was also recognising this is a north facing. It gets baking hot in summer. It's going to twist no matter what we do, and so it's acknowledging that as well,
and celebrating that as an outcome of what happens. So the other aspect of this building, which was a big factor, is these concrete blocks that it's made from.
They're 1.2
by 600 by 600, so they weigh a tonne each, and there's 270 of them in the project. So this concrete block is actually a byproduct of the ready mix industry. So when a concrete truck goes out to site and pours a slab, they always take a little bit extra just to make sure that they don't run out. And then they go back to the concrete yard and they've got a little bit left in the drum, and the concrete yard was literally finding a way to store its waste, so it was pouring it into these really rough moulds just so they could make blocks so they could stack their waste up instead of just pouring it on the ground or in a hole. And then they were selling these to farmers that were using them as retaining walls, but they didn't really have a purpose for them. And Chris had spotted them a few years ago on a farm, and the idea came about when we visited the concrete yard of using them. And the thing about these blocks is they were just so rough. Like, it was literally a waste product. The moulds that they were using had just been beaten around, so the blocks varied 50 mil between each other. There was Snicker bars that were, the guys eating their lunch would just throw their waste, like Coke cans that were cast into them. You know, these weren't an architectural product at all, but we saw a real advantage to using them, a really interesting and cheap. They were $22 each. So suddenly, again, you've got this amazing aspect to the building, but it's all been driven by costs.
The biggest part of, the most detailed part of thought was they had to have a hook in it so they could lift it up, and otherwise it was just chuck it in there. They're not necessarily like a single pour. The truck might run out, and so they might be multi-pour. You can't.
So you get these different colours, like sediment layers through the blocks, which helps it really sit in the landscape as well. And it's also a really nice story that each block has come from someone else's building locally. So you can see a couple of pinky red ones, and that's because the Wodonga footpaths are all red. And so you've actually got part of the city footpath in the building. And although this wasn't something that we went out and sort of planned, it was just a really nice aspect for tying this piece of architecture to its region.
You can see as well, just like the shadows cast, you can just see how rough some of them are. And we used, I was there, I was involved in the first few courses of it. There was a big guy, excavator, just like the fluffy dice in a car with these tiny chains, just picking them up and chucking them down. There was, I think, 3 of us trying to deal with that and position them in. And then Chris and another mate were on the cement mixer, just literally constantly making cement. Someone running a wheelbarrow. So, and that was the mortar. And it was just this, it's pretty fun, actually. It was a really fun process.
So another thing about this project, obviously, is the furniture. All the furniture we custom made. And this, again, was the opportunity to prototype with the lighting. So you can see our timber highlight, yeah, it blends in with all the rest of the timber, but there's a timber highline light in there.
And then the brass.
And then there's a brass one as well.
This was the original project, so to speak, that it was designed for. This was the space that we wanted those lights for. That was, you can also see
so this is the view through the bedroom. So Ben, being a bit of a sculpted gypsy, he always loved sleeping under the stars. So he wanted his bedroom to be able to open up. So because of that, we decided to have the whole 4 by 3.5 metre opening out to the courtyard be one big window, one big hinge door. So then, yeah, he could have that dream of.
There's plenty of nights, as Chris said, whilst we were all at uni here, we'd go up to Yakandana for a week. Over summer, we'd go there for a month or so. And it's such a nice place. You would literally just sit outside and you could sleep outside, but where the steel yard is, you don't want to sleep there. But you'd hang out all night, and so this is allowing him to achieve that in a safe way.
So the other part about this being sort of a flexible design and things changing was we built this house when the design started. Ben was a bachelor. By the time the house finished, he had a partner and a baby. So things changed.
Hence the cot. That's not the cot.
That's a changing table. But, anyway, so the courtyard was originally going to be water, like just a really shallow pool with a tree in the middle, so you're getting these reflections onto the ceiling. Obviously, that's a massive drowning hazard, so we had to get rid of that, and that became it became a garden, and it also, this opportunity that's a little carved stone that's a child's play toy that you sit on and it spins around. So that's something that Ben made.
He got really excited one day. He being a sculptor, he had this awesome stone, and I think sitting next to it there was a big ball bearing. He's like, what can I make from this? And he put it on, drilled some holes, and made it look like a bug. And a kid can sit on it and spin around. That was him for a day.
So this is the kitchen. So all the joinery we cut out on the CNC at our Preston workshop, and then we were looking at obviously you can get that laminated and have different finishes, but we actually found out that you can have brass for about the same price. So it's actually only 0.3 of a mil brass sheet that has been glued on with a contact adhesive, and then that provides a really nice surface that tells a story. So as you touch it, it gets dirty, and we had the idea that when his baby starts to walk, he'll be touching the bottom, and the fingerprints will start at the bottom, and then as he gets bigger, the fingerprints will go up the wall. But we never wanted this to be sort of like a shiny finished thing. So to give it a bit of a consistent finish, we sprayed it with apple cider vinegar, which gives it a patina. So that's that sort of effect. So instead of seeing, I guess, what you might consider dirty hand marks on a shiny surface, we thought we'd give it all that texture, which sort of really matches all the better to it. We'd sprayed it on the door as well, which was steel, that does the same sort of patina effect. We should have that.
Yeah, this is the third last photo, but it's just this is the back end of the house, and I laid maybe one of that bottom left block or something like that, and you know, there's that sort of story to absolutely everything with this house, and you know, that's the system that they developed.
It's the motor for the moving roof.
The roof, yeah.
And again, you know, we originally thought maybe we'll spray these concrete blocks with a white concrete, but as soon as we started working with them, there you can see the different colours through the pores, the different concrete pores of the block. We just couldn't believe just how amazing these looked in the landscape. So we decided to keep it as raw as possible.
And then this was Ben as well at the last bit, because they are so rough, we had to chop them up. And this is, I guess, what we've just decided to label the maker's mark. This is what Ben got really excited by these. Those little chocks of wood were part of the story, and so he's decided to leave that. And that's just throughout this entire project where we, I guess, as well, we've decided not to, it's not about being a perfect object again, it's about the space and the interaction with it. And so something's a lot more interesting if you have these little things. It's not about, for us at least, it's not about having this super sharp space that's all plastered with beautiful shadow lines and so forth. This is what it's about.
And I guess, yeah, there's errors in a sense throughout the whole building. Because I was making it and I don't know how to make these. I don't know how to make a house. So in learning that process, there's errors through it, but celebrating those errors adds, just a richness.
Well, that is actually, I can remember when Ben was doing this, we started putting them in, they're like, hold on, these aren't square, it was like tilting away, and we were 2 courses up, and like, crap. And so we had to quickly run around, get some timber, and he just hammered them in there, and job done.
So I guess just to wrap it up, through our whole, through our whole, we can show the video now. So,
this is just a quick video
and
to give you an idea of
the moving components. But to sort of wrap up, like I guess through our whole furniture and our architecture, there's the idea of iteration after iteration and learning from those mistakes and actually having a better and more richer outcome and a more considered outcome than you would have without making those errors. And you know, you're never going to get anything done if you just keep it all in your mind and try and spit out the perfect design. It's all about just starting something, doing it with your hands, and then learning from what happened. Thank you very much.